Sai and his team approached me, we started discussing on potential topics on what to discuss and how we can make this conversation a lot more fruitful. And I specifically say conversation because I'm not someone who just talks at a screen. You don't have any obligation to sit here and just listen to me talk. We're all professionals or are aiming to be professionals in the privacy space, cybersecurity space, and this would be something that is an area where we need to exchange ideas. It's mostly about an exchange of experiences. You don't know what it is once till you're in it, and the only way to go forward is to have an exchange of ideas and exchange of experiences, which will help everyone grow. So with the purpose of this, we started discussing AI since that is the very hot topic right now. But we realized everybody is talking about the EU AI Act, the India proposed framework for those who are specializing in India, the US multitude of state laws, frameworks, drafts, NIST, SOC, everybody is coming up and discussing the theoretical aspects of it. But no one is really telling us how to implement it. But this is something that we understand only once we are actually doing the work. And it's also something which is not commonly considered or spoken about from a very specific implementation point of view. So the purpose of today's conversation is just for me to tell you my logic, my reasoning, my understanding on how we can and how a successful manner of implementing AI as a tool can go about without actually making it seem like the big bad boy of technology now, which is what it is being seen as. I know AI as a topic is, as a concept in itself, is something that scares a lot of privacy professionals and those in the privacy space from the get-go. Till you're not actually into regulating it and into being the public enemy number one for businesses who see so much opportunity with AI, you don't understand what potential damage it could cause. But at the same time, as someone who is working to improve a technology, at the same time, make sure compliance is a key concern over here, it's a difficult balancing act. So with that, I will present my screen. Please excuse the PPT. It is not my forte. And please feel free to cut me off at any point of time with questions, comments, thoughts, any of that, and I'll be happy to discuss it. Hopefully, this part won't be too long and we'll have the last half an hour to have a discussion. Now, for me, it always comes back to the fundamentals, right? As a lawyer and a privacy professional, I take great comfort in breaking down definitions to understand what a particular requirement, technology, or any concept means. It always comes back to the fundamentals. So when we're talking about protecting AI, protecting privacy within AI, which is now something which has become a key concern, we need to go back and visit the fundamentals of what privacy means, what information privacy means, and what AI is. What is this technology? Not everybody comes from a technical, not everybody who is practicing in the data privacy field comes from a technical background. It is something they understand theoretically, but maybe not practically. So the best way that I have seen it is to understand a concept is to go back years ago when someone actually sat down and defined these concepts, right? So when we say privacy, we talk about the right to be left alone or freedom from the right to be left away from interference or intrusion. Now, this is all very well and good in theory, but when you drill down on the definition even further, what will it mean for me as someone who is representing a company versus someone who is a data subject herself, right? For me as a data subject, privacy may be the right to be left alone, but does privacy mean the right to or the obligation to leave someone alone as someone who is collecting the data? Then we come to information privacy, right? So to understand as a data collector, I need to then go and look into what information privacy means, which is that I need to let someone control how their personal information is collected and used. It is not that I'm not allowed to access the information. It is not that I'm not allowed to grow my business based on data, because in today's day and age, there is no alternative. Starting from my neighborhood Panwala, who will be collecting data in some manner through his Paytm account or anything, to the Metas and Googles of the world, there is nobody that really functions without information in today's day and age if they are aiming to grow and proceed. So I look at information privacy. Then how do I bring these two concepts into a new concept like AI, which my company or which my company is planning to implement, or what I see online as, okay, this is a feature that I have now. What does it mean that Copilot is now integrated with my Microsoft Teams? Or right now, there is an AI bot that is taking notices and taking any sort of transcription for me in this meeting, right? So I come down to, what does AI? It's very simple when you break it down. AI is any computer machine which is being designed to simulate human learning. So we are aiming to put humanity into a machine, which then brings out a barrage of other questions. It will not be limited to just AI being a very controlled technological tool. AI is so much more than just a tool in today's day and age. You have to have economic considerations, psychological considerations, social considerations, right? So I put the tool aside and then I go back to, what does privacy mean? There has to be some sort of a concept of privacy which is unique to everybody, but at the same time is common enough for me to get it as a base. So I start looking at the fair information principles, which were designed in the 1970s, if I'm not mistaken, which were the first ones that started talking about regulating privacy and data privacy. So the fair information principles form the building blocks of all privacy related regulations, frameworks, concepts, conversations, everything. The fair information principles focused on 8 particular facts. For me, it was collection limitation, data quality, purpose specification, use limitation, transparency, security, individual participation, and accountability. Now, while these seem like words which are either very commonly used, or at the same time, we have synonyms of these words being used in today's neuro laws, frameworks, etc., they are, if you go back, all connected to each other because it makes sense. It is logical. If for me, privacy means giving you right over your data, I need to tell you how much I'm going to collect. Make sure what I collect is for the purpose which I'm telling you, which means I have to be very open, which means I have to have a compliant and a transparent business practice, which also means that all this accountability falls on me. And if I have accountability, I need to ensure security safeguards. And for the purpose of my business, it works just as well for me that the data quality remains the same. Now, this is all technology agnostic, right? This was something someone came up with 30, 40 odd years ago, and it is something that has stood the test of time at the end of the day, I would argue. So the fair information principles, while not brought into official regulation themselves, trickle down to multiple other frameworks, including OECD, GDPR, US federal laws when they were contemplating it, and today when they're contemplating it, CCPA, LGPD for Brazil, DPDP Act today for India, POPIA for South Africa, all kinds of laws, right? So people got together and they said, okay, fine. Policymakers decided those 8 principles boil down to 4 concepts, which is transparency and choice, rights of data subjects, minimization, security safeguards. Now, these 4 then translate into accountability because everybody who is giving data, collecting data is accountable to a certain extent. We may argue that the data subjects themselves do not have many rights or do not have any accountability towards those to whom they are providing the data, but that is not true, right? I would argue, even though accountability is a concept which is catered towards organizations and data collectors, that everybody in the exchange of data has some form of accountability. So then this translated into setting global standards, right? GDPR came in first, made life incredibly complicated for everyone who is collecting data and was doing so without any concerns previously. They started scaring people. So then sector specific laws came in where they said, okay, fine, I understand everybody's business is different. Everybody's purposes are different. Everybody's reason for existence is different. So let's try and merge all of this together and see for you specifically in the sector, what works best. Now, while the intentions of all of this seem to be very pure and very understanding, I believe it did create a larger amount of confusion, and anybody who is a privacy practitioner would probably agree, right? So then after that, we tried implementing it. We said, okay, there are multiple ways that technology can help us. So we might as well be compliant to the extent possible. There are multiple ways in which data is expecting us. So while the value of data was growing, the opportunities to experiment with data, to experiment with technology, to experiment with opportunities are also growing. So then we came to AI. Someone decided that there are going to be types of models. Technology is going to help imitate human beings. So we came to first predictive AI, which essentially used historical data to forecast any sort of future trends, events, which became extremely popular when people were using their phones, when people were using social media, when people were using any sort of app. And they're like, hey, this is great. I'm getting information that I usually have to turn on to, excuse me, information for which I had to go to the TV or type into Google. It's right there in the palm of my hands. Okay, wonderful. Then we came to, okay, we can get better with AI. So the technology kept growing, right? We came to generative AI, which was for us to create new content or data, which didn't require human input. So we have chatbots that we talk to now. We have profiling. I see my Instagram and I only see what Instagram assumes I would see, because even if I had opened content which was sent to me, Instagram assumed it is what I like. And they continued. My Spotify playlist every day gives me a new playlist to saying, based on your day, this is what we think you'd like to hear. That is terrifying, but at the same time, very convenient. Okay, I don't need to put in the effort to go look for a song. And it's what I get. So we come on. So then it's convenient. Businesses are making money. What is the issue? What became the issue with AI was that there was no control over it. The way that we can control other forms of technology by limiting their access, AI has the potential tomorrow to grow on its own. And like I said, you can't only consider the technological availability when you're looking at AI or access. You need to understand human psyche, because that is what is driving this entire force, right? So when policymakers started looking at, okay, how do we control it? What do we do? They considered the fact that there will always be more hunger in human beings for data. Once we see the value of something and we realize how much it can help us grow, there are very few powers in the world that can help us, that can stop us from using that to our advantage. That is the fundamental of human beings, right? Then we realized, okay, so AI works for me in one manner as a person, but my government is using AI. Why should it stop them? My company is using AI. Why should it stop them? It's working to give me playlists, but at the same time, where else are you using AI? Because now this technology is taking decisions about me, not even for me, but about me, to give to somebody else. So then we realized, and policymakers realized, that privacy harms from data collection in AI don't only limit the harm to one person. It becomes a societal epidemic, so to speak. Then they realized, okay, fine, existing frameworks will not work. It's all well and good in terms of a fundamental, but then it doesn't cater to this one particular tool, which has absolutely no limitations in terms of what it can do. For example, 15 years ago, I'm sure you couldn't imagine that you can ask ChatGPT for questions you would ask your therapist, and ChatGPT would actually provide you with that information, right? But what is do you people who are not in the privacy space or the regulation space or the technology space, and as much as we do interact largely with that strata due to our own professional, not a lot of people think about what they put into those tools. ChatGPT has become one of the most convenient, ChatGPT, Copilot have become one of the most convenient tools for people. And it's not limited to just say, draft a particular paragraph for me or draft this particular section of my CV. It's become a lot more. So how do you limit it? Why should I tell ChatGPT or assume that my data is safe or I'm talking to someone in secret when I'm using ChatGPT as a therapist? When on the other end, there is someone sitting and collecting all my data and understanding what mindset I am in, sharing that data with God knows who, and giving me advertisements for whatever issues I have brought up with ChatGPT. So all of these decisions, which do continue to exist till date, have resulted in this stringent, overbearing regulations of AI. And I say overbearing only because of the fact that it's very difficult to keep up with it. I'm someone who has a job which requires me to be aware of everything that is happening and ensure that I am and my company is compliant in multiple jurisdictions. And at the end of the day, it is not humanly possible. I cannot keep track of all the AI regulations. I cannot see which regulations bar sensitive data, how they define sensitive data, which regulations have, it won't come to me from the top of my head as to how data without consent will work for AI. Do I need to take consent every time? What do the regulations say? Right? How do I prevent AI from growing? And my tech team, how do I sit with them and say, okay, you can't have any sort of AI bias? Am I supposed to sit with every tool? Am I supposed to sit with every member of the team who is developing it? How do I pretend to even understand that there are people who are so much more experienced and who spend their days trying to find ways to work with AI? And not all those people have good intentions. There are data thefts that occur. There are data leakages that occur. Data is exposed. And at the end of the day, all of this data under all of these regulations in all of these countries is my responsibility. It's not possible. So how do you do it? How do you regulate AI for yourself as someone who is in the business of ensuring that business continues to grow, but at the same time you are compliant? How do you do it? It's not possible for anybody to say that, okay, I'm only going to work in your multinational organization for one country. That's not going to work for every business model. It's not going to work to say that as a small tech startup company, I'm going to provide my business or provide my tool only to you and nobody else, so that we know what our regulations are and we are completely, excuse me, 100% aware of what is happening. Now, this is what you see on the screen is as of yesterday, the number of AI laws, regulations that are either in force, in draft, or have been passed. Now, this is a large number. I cannot possibly keep track. No human being can keep track of everything that is happening. I used AI to find this data. It's not something that will come off the top of my head, right? I mean, for a lot of people, would they think that country like, say, Bangladesh is looking into AI? What we think of when we think of Bangladesh is in terms of economic progress or economic scenarios or political or things like that. But they have, so any business will naturally think it is easy. But no, they also have privacy rights. Why should they not protect the rights of their citizens, their individuals? They will also continue to regulate and get with the times. There is no country that wants to be left behind. And in that process, we are the ones who are stuck in this race, right? Now, when we talk about AI, we know that as a professional, I will know, okay, I should first go and look at the most important act that is there, which is coming from the country with the most evolved and the most universally accepted Privacy Act. So I'll go to the EOAI Act. I'll understand that there are certain requirements, there are certain classifications of AI model, there are certain categorizations of data that can go, that can't go, how AI can be trained. So I look at the EOAI Act. I'm sure all of you are largely familiar with what the EOAI Act attempts to regulate. It is talking about the kind of risks that one may face with AI. And if they do so, how is it, whether or not it is permissible to go ahead with that technology, right? So it says unacceptable, high, limited, and minimal risk. Unacceptable risk will be something that is, say, social scoring. I will come down to social scoring in a bit. I will talk about that as well and how it works. But that is a very common concept, which a lot of governments would like to do, but they directly impact an individual's livelihood. So anything that has potential to result to an unacceptable risk, not allowed. High risk, you have certain requirements. You need to make sure that your security safeguards are at a certain standard. You need to ensure that there is complete transparency, accountability, etc. Agreed. Okay, then you have something which is at a limited minimal risk. You'll have your profiling for Spotify. You'll have any sort of advertisements that are coming to you, etc. They largely fall within these two categories, right? The EOAI Act also requires us to do something which is called an conformity assessment, which is a PIA, a version of a PIA, DPIA, etc., which tries to get us to understand as to how the particular tool will work within this entire frame, right? And it needs to go through a detailed documentation process. Everything in the spirit of transparency needs to be accounted for. And then, of course, risk management, which is a key part of any compliance, which means that you need to ensure you have those requirements put in, those safety, those safeguards, those rails put in, which ensure the data quality, which is going in and coming out, remains pristine, so to speak. So then, okay, EUAI Act, very useful, helps me understand what sort of risks can come out of AI. Then we go on to US Algorithmic Accountability Act, right? It talks about conducting it. The main focus of the act, what it boils down to at the end of the day, barring all the other requirements, some of which overlap EOAI Act, some of which are independent, is to conduct impact assessments, PIAs or DPIAs, for any automated decision system. Now, the purpose, of course, remains consistent as any other privacy assessment that you're doing, which means you evaluate the potential risks and biases of a tool, and you see what role it plays in making critical decisions. And accordingly, you take a call on whether or not it is permissible to be used, in what circumstances it is to be used. US went a step ahead and also established a Bureau of Technology, which advises the FTC on technological aspects, because not everybody understands the technology, even though they are policymakers, lawmakers, regulators, implementers, everything. Not everybody understands the basics of it. And any sort of findings that every assessment comes up with needs to be reported by the AI developer to the FTC. Then we come to the East. Singapore, one of the most developed in the East in terms of privacy legislation, technology legislation, etc. They focused on explainability. So simplification of the process. They addressed the issue that, all right, not everybody understands the technology, but everybody knows that it exists. Everybody is talking about it. So focus on simplifying and explaining what AI is. They went back to the basics and said AI is the point of AI is to continue to protect privacy. So you focus on transparency, fairness, accountability, and you do that through conducting regular audits, maintaining quality, and most importantly, maintaining permanent human oversight over these AI systems. Then we move further and we see China, who have been extremely active in terms of regulating privacy. And they came up with multiple frameworks and multiple regulations, some of which are currently in the draft stage, some of which are currently being discussed, and some which are being passed. And they came up with different regulations for different AI models. They took a more sectorial, so to speak, a sectorial approach, where they wanted to address privacy and security issues in the different types of AI. And they wanted to make it a little more granular, right? So things like you need to label your content. If it is AI generated, you need to regularly conduct ethical reviews, standards of which are again defined by the government. You need to ensure transparency in even the making of the algorithm and not just the output, etc. Right? So all of these at the end of the day, the purpose starting from EU to China to anywhere else where AI is being discussed, at the end of the day, the purpose comes to how do you tackle the challenges that this technology may pose? They're all trying to answer the same questions, right? Now, the problem with all of these regulations, and that's not to say that they aren't largely fair in their ask. I know not a lot of people would agree with that, but I do believe that these regulations do become very detailed and relatively burdensome to creators because there is a major concern in terms of what this can do to the future. But it's also a fact that law and regulations will never grow as fast as technology. I can try and regulate to whatever certain possibility today. I can create a regulation as a country and launch it. And 1 week later, someone will come up with a new way to use that technology. So most of these laws are they're trying to solve problems of the past based on experiences they have had with this technology and not having the bandwidth to focus on prospective developments with this technology. So what also comes is after that, we end up ignoring the fact that there are contextual considerations to AI development. There is physical, economic, reputational, emotional, relative harm to individuals. All of these that need to be taken into consideration when you see where a technology can go to be able to have a futuristic law, which is largely difficult, right? You need to identify the creation of new risks, which is something that you can only do as a fortune teller. You can't do this as a human being and say, okay, what can it potentially cause? Because you never know what someone may come up with. And most importantly, it's very difficult to gauge and to quantify the societal harm that may arise out of AI and to regulate it. So that becomes very difficult for someone who is working in a progressive field like technology, for all of us, to say that, okay, let technology hold on and let regulations catch up with them. So as somebody who is implementing it for me today, I will have to just make sure that my business follows the bare minimums if there is a new technology, or my client tomorrow follows the bare minimum for any new technology of a framework that may not apply because we are assuming everything is even, which becomes incredibly complicated for someone who is trying to ensure compliance, yet at the same time be an enabler for businesses, for any sort of new developments, creations, innovations, right? So what these countries did, they understood that not all regulations can cover everything. They pulled out frameworks. There are tools, discussion papers, guidelines, reports from multiple countries, right? So DataGuard has an online tracker, which is incredibly useful. And it shows you how much a country is trying to keep up with the growth of technology and realizing every day that there may be a new issue. And this is not something which is specific to AI. We saw this when privacy was growing as a concept and people were trying to regulate that. Every day you would understand that there's something that is unclear. Someone would make an argument where, you would say, okay, this is a potential interpretation. We don't know what the expectations of a regulator are. And you'd see hundreds of white papers, uh, tools that give you an automated assessment. You'd see hundreds of public comments coming from regulators all over the world trying to explain what it is that they're trying to do. And we're still trying to keep up to this date. So how do I do this? Okay, the laws are too complicated. So then I look at the sectoral specific frameworks. They would have naturally done their homework. They would have seen everything that has been considered by policymakers. And for me, as someone who is a lawmaker, how do I, as a implementer, how do I go and bring all of this together? So first, ISO came up with certain guidelines and certain requirements. They focused on ethical and societal implementation of implications of AI. They brought together a framework which discusses the entire life cycle of an AI tool and how to manage it and how to ensure it is up to the standards that the world expects. They wanted to allow us to check the robustness of AI systems, yet at the same time, ensure that we know what this means in terms of the potential risk that it can cause. And of course, they gave us a guidance on how we can govern AI within an organization with a largely tech perspective, right? And with ethical considerations. Then I moved on to NIST. NIST will tell me how to manage risks. NIST will give me mitigation recommendations for these risks. They will tell me on what a trustworthy AI system looks like and how I assess bias, how I assess robustness of a system, and at the end of the day, how I manage all of this within my GRC, within my governance framework for this country. How can I adapt this for myself? Okay. So I can work with NIST, ISO, everything put together. But then SOC comes up. SOC focuses on the cybersecurity aspect of it and looks at it in terms of how I can ensure my data is protected, what goes into the system and what comes out of the system. How do I focus on that? Okay, somehow bring it all together. But what it looks like by the end of it is this, right? If I sit down today to see what all I must comply with, what all I must bring to the table, and what my business needs to look into, it will look like something. It will look something like this. Now, while this is an incredibly useful resource when you break it down, at the outset, if you give a mash of requirements which lead up to about 20 specific requirements to business who are also people doing their job, they will not react to it positively for the simple reason that it is too complicated to implement. For every country, a one size fits all policy will not work because everybody's concerns, everybody's purposes, everybody's fundamentals are different, right? So, okay, I can leave AI alone. What do? I just don't regulate it. I let technology go as is. I ensure basic privacy principles are fulfilled. But that results in a larger effect on society and people than anybody can control. AI has shown to result in loss of opportunities for individuals. There have been active cases of discrimination in employment, education, housing for people who rely on these benefits. There has been a large increase of surveillance and profiling that has been seen in the last 5 years in itself since the boom of the technology. There have been people who have been denied credit, who have been given differential pricing because of such tools. And of course, it increases the scale of data and the amount of misuse that can arise out of this data exponentially. So I can't leave it alone. What do I do? Like I said, it always comes back to the basics, right? I need to focus, sit down and look at what are the essentials that I need to look at when I think about regulating any new technology, but especially one that has such potential growth, has potential for rapid growth. So first thing I will always look at is the geography. You understand where your data is located, where it is being collected from, what are the regulatory impacts in that particular country. That does not mean that I have to follow all of them, but I need to have a fair understanding on whether that country is interested in regulating AI or not, whether there is something that I need to look at or not. And then I look at the jurisdiction requirements for any specific sectoral laws. Now, I know that seems very contradictory to what I have said so far, but this is not something we can avoid in terms of we can't completely ignore the fact that there are, at the end of the day, multiple laws regulating multiple facets of this one tool or this one particular technological boom, right? So I look at it from a very overarching perspective. I will see basics of what it is that I need to consider, its existence, yes or no, and then move on to the other factors which are common between all of this, because they are the fundamentals on what FIP, the Fair Information Principles, are based on 50 years. So then I look at the security. For me, what is most important is ensuring the data is secure. No law can ever fault you for making sure that security measures either live up to the existing industry standards or not. So it's an easy kill. It's an easy win. I make sure security protocols are put in place. Encryption standards have become a bare minimum requirement these days. I make sure access controls are defined and implemented. User authentication protocols are put in place. Backups are secured and created on a regular basis. And most importantly, the incident response plan is aligned and agreed upon with all stakeholders so that everybody is aware on what happens in case something goes wrong. Now comes the tricky part, right? Now, while all of this so far has been quite common in any other technologies and AI has the unique feature of data training. So how do I make sure that this unique feature is held under control? I can't possibly, if I'm launching something in 15 countries, sit down and make a sorry. Sorry, is anyone saying something? Okay. So I come down to looking at the data that is going into training this model. I'll verify the data. For me, what is most important is to make sure that I'm getting accurate data so that I get an accurate output, right? Which means that I need to verify the origin and compliance of the data provider. So for example, if I'm not collecting data straight from the source, I need to make sure that whoever I'm getting data from is trustworthy and has an ethical business practice, because their business practice directly impacts mine, right? Then we have who is providing me with the tool, who is providing me with the solution. You need to make sure that whoever is doing that is also in the same boat as you, is aware of the fact that they have multiple compliance requirements, and they need to build it into something that works not just for us, but also doesn't work in our detriment, right? So you do all of this, but at the same time, you cannot be someone who is working in this field and say that I don't know what the technology is. So whether we like it or not tomorrow, we do need to understand the technology of AI itself. I remember when blockchain became a big topic of conversation about 5 years ago, there were a lot of resources, a lot of conversations out there by lawyers, privacy professionals, regulators, etc., who were talking about the dangers of blockchain, without actually understanding what blockchain technology was. They were talking about how terrifying crypto is and how it's going to be a nightmare to regulate without actually understanding the technology, which meant eventually we didn't really have anything that came out concrete out of that entire conversation. So that is not something, AI is not a fad, it's not going to die away. It is something we will have to get with the program and understand how these methodologies work, how data training works, how sanitization of data works, how what is the purpose of your tool. You don't need to get down to getting a BTech degree, but at the same time, we can't say that we are not aware of what it does, but we just know the potential risks, right? There are opportunities to arrive out of AI for everybody. But at the same time, we can't say that the risks outweigh the opportunities or that the opportunities outweigh the risk. It has to be a balancing act. Then I come down to consent management. That is a basic fundamental. I've understood all of this. I've put in my mechanisms. I've done my due diligence. But I need to ensure that wherever I am or whichever manner consent is being obtained, recorded, and managed is something that is transparent and something that allows a user or an individual to feel like they have control. AI is the easiest technology to go wild. It is very easy for us to find ways around the consent management process, around a consent requirement, and for it to just be let loose without considering any of these things. So this comes down to the people who are building the tool and implementing it to make sure that there are many ways in how you can do this, right? But it is not something that can be ignored or put away. And then the most debated and the most controversial, in my opinion, is the data retention factor of AI. And I'm not talking controversial in terms of regulating it. Every law will say retain data to the extent it is necessary or legally required, and then delete it. But AI uses data on a much faster pace and for much broader reasons. How do I define my purpose as a business who is creating an AI tool? How do I keep it limited to just one round of data training? It's not going to be easy. It goes back to the fact that humans are always hungry for data. This is where people in the regulation field come in. So your DPOs, your CISOs, etc. This is where they will come in. You have to have a very clear understanding of what you want to do with that data. And the easiest way to ensure compliance is to get rid of the data if you no longer need it. So data gone is risk mitigated. So this is something I know a lot of you, if you are in the privacy field, would be getting pushback on in terms of we might need the data tomorrow. We don't know what it is. We don't know what we need it for. That argument started to gain strength when companies started doing marketing related activities and profiling related activities. And it's only going to keep gaining strength because I can always defend the fact that I need the information to train my tool. I'm providing you a tool, you're using a tool. So you can't not keep the data. But this is something which has to kind of be cemented into your AI governance program, in my opinion. And then, of course, third-party risk assessment. Now, a lot of people who do TPRMs, they, of course, go through the third-party due diligence process by understanding third-party, having multiple rounds of negotiations. They, have contracts put in place, etc. But that's usually not incredibly sufficient for a concept where, or a tool or a service where you have such a large opportunity to misuse it, right? So here it is all the more important to make sure that any AI particular related process that I do have or any initiative that we are taking, a TPRM involves a little more details on my third parties, which are not only the tool provider, but anybody who is accessing the tool on my behalf, anybody who is managing the tool on my behalf, anybody who's maintaining the tool on my behalf, anybody who is a consultant and has access to my environment, anything, right? Question it. I'm not saying you have to document that entire process, but be aware, do trainings, make sure contracts have clear agreement, have clear clauses that enforce your rights, and make sure that the potential for misuse is minimized to the extent possible, which also means you examine the data which you're getting, which is coming out. You determine under what circumstances one can access the data, one can delete the data, one can archive the data, etc. All of these must be clearly defined, if nothing else. And of course, the best way is at the end of the day, companies like ISO, SOC 2 certificate providers, they do to a certain extent do their due diligence, right? So you can always depend on it. That becomes a slightly more managerial sideway that you can make sure that, okay, you have some sort of comfort that these particular certifications exist. They have considered all the requirements, they are aware, etc. They don't negate our requirement to assess our third parties independently, but it does help. And most importantly, audit trails. At the end of the day, you need to make sure where every data point goes, for what, and why it was necessary to do so. So logs are, I keep telling my IT team this, maintaining logs is the best defense anyone can have. You can't question it, right? And you define what is the information you need for compliance, verification, security monitoring, etc. And you keep that as a detailed record so that nobody can have an opportunity to mishandle data. All of this boils down to say that it may be a new tool. It may be something that is very difficult for us to understand, regulate, and it may be growing at an exponential pace. But the fundamentals never really fail us, right? There are commonalities between all these regulations with these big, big names and these impressive requirements, which every company will have to do. And eventually we will all get with the program. But and before that, life can't stop, business can't stop, growth of technology can't stop. So coming back to the basics is always something that is a foolproof strategy, in my opinion. Right? So conducting a PIA will give you most of the answers you need, even if it is something that is alien to you. It is your checklist, your cheat list, everything put in one. And like I mentioned, contract terms and liabilities. Now, this is in terms of the presentation that I have. I would like to hear if anyone has any thoughts, questions, comments, which they would like to discuss. Because like I said, this is a concept which is constantly growing. And it will only work if people discuss it with each other and they go ahead with, making sure that everyone is aware of everything that they have gathered in terms of knowledge.
Hey, hi, Maanya, Jagdish here. Hope my voice is audible.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maanya, I'm part of a TPRM role actually. It's a very interesting topic. I really appreciate the time what you have given to us. Yeah, so I've been joined a bit late, but I just wanted to make sure that
Sorry, your voice is
the
breaking, Jagdish. Sorry. Is it just me?
I think I am at office actually, so I thought to take the time and trying to give the out of the office space. So probably that's one of the reason the voice would not be reachable properly. So is it much better now? Just wanted to cross check again.
Sorry?
Okay, just give me a minute. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah,
Just give me a minute.
sorry. Yeah, there just seems to be some disturbance.
Jagadish, maybe you can just type it in the chat. I can read it for you. I request all the other participants as well. Like if you have any questions, you can please unmute yourself or else you can drop it in the chat.
Yeah, hi Jagdish here. I think it's much better, I believe, because I just came out from the office. Hope the voice is loud and.
It is much better. It is. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. So yeah, I just mentioned that I joined a bit late. Yeah, I do understand the concept of what you're trying to correlate about the AI compliance requirement perspective, right? So this is a new module. I can say that because we've been part of the TPRM role for more than 5 years. So, but slowly we are pitching into the AI module, which is in multiple aspect, even privacy and other stuff too. So with this, is there any certification which make us comfortable in terms of learning the new AI technology, which would in line with the TPRM and other stuff? That's what I just wanted to make sure. In case if you have any, please let us know on that.
Yeah, of course. So there are a lot of resources out there. So if you actually want to go and start looking into what it is that can give you the information, you will have a lot of information. There's no dearth of information. The challenge comes in when you try to put all that together, you need to interpret what it means to you. Which is why I think the best way to do it is to first define the purpose for which you are gathering the information and see when you are doing a TPRM, what it is you want to assess, right? I do understand you want to assess compliance, but compliance against what? Do you want to assess compliance for ensuring fair ethical practices, to ensure data sanity, to ensure any kind of other requirement when you are talking about AI? So I would always go back to first determining that purpose and seeing what it is that is the best way to go about, gathering that information. And honestly, I know a lot of people don't agree, but I do think certifications and qualifications, even if it is something like a LinkedIn learning certification or IAPP or ISO, all of these do play a big role in your own personal growth and understanding of a concept. So I hope that answered your question, Jagdish.
Yeah, I do, because I already certified with the CISA and also I certified with the ISO 27001 LA with the latest module too. And to a certain extent, I do part of ISC Square. The basic cyber certificate is also done. Of course, that's a free certificate altogether. I'm looking for any other specific which may be related to the AI, which maybe would helpful for us in the career perspective. So that's what I just wanted to know that. But anyway, I think you answered my question. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to add to your query. Yeah, just to add your query regarding the AI in the third party, you can consider the NIST 600-1 for risk management of AI, just for answering, adding to what Maanya said. Also, when you are referring to ISO standards, is there any specific apart from 27001 you are considering, or only 27001 you are referring to?
Is that towards Jagdish? Sorry.
I'm not sure that. Yeah. So basically, what I'm trying to say that I've been certified with ISO 27001 guidelines, and of course the CISA too. The only thing is the new pitch, which is part of an AI, which specific to, as you mentioned, that I really appreciate again, your NIST 600, right? Because we do follow the NIST guidelines in the information security terms and condition perspective, right? So, but I really appreciate that you do call out that NIST, one of the module which provide the AI related stuff. That's what I am looking for. Thank you, the person who called out. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Also, Jagdish, at the end of the day, there's nothing really that can compare to just having a large network of people who are going through the same thing, because I promise you're not the only one asking this question. There are multiple people who are facing the same issue and trying to understand how they can do a better job in understanding it. So I think forums like this also really help, because I don't claim to know everything about it. I definitely don't know everything about it. And which is why I think more than one person just talking to you, discussions like this definitely do help.
Certainly. Thank you.
Ma'am, we do have a question in the chat. Could you please share your experience of security and privacy of data during the pandemic, as many cyber attacks and pharma and data?
Yeah. So again, I just want to point out that I'm here as an individual and not a representative of my company, but I joined the pharma industry right after the pandemic. So when they were just facing these issues and when data privacy became a very big topic. There were a lot of pharma attacks, there were a lot of attacks on pharma companies at that point because they were in the limelight. And there was, see, I will say that you can never condone any such issue, right? But it did result in the pharma industry, at least in their practice in India, becoming a lot more cognizant of potential harms from non-compliance with data privacy and understanding the importance of data privacy. Pharma as an industry, we sometimes forget the general perception is that, they're separate from hospitals, so they won't really be collecting a lot of information. Or the other extreme is that, pharma has everything, pharma has details and everything. We're somewhere in between, but such instances and such sort of incidents do give, if nothing else, a chance to relook at your own current practices. And I will say in the last 3 years, the pharma industry has overall really amped up its data protection game. They've become an active voice in the data protection conversations in India and everywhere else, of course. But it is something that happened, but hopefully it's not something that will happen again at such a large scale. No company is not vulnerable. Everyone is vulnerable. There is potential to be in that situation, but hopefully not anytime soon.
There is one more question from Vishal. How can intellectual property rights and liability framework be integrated into AI governance? Are there any specific legal accountability and responsibilities assigned?
Sorry, so you want to take legal, could you repeat that?
How can intellectual property rights and a liability framework be integrated into AI governance?
Right. So IP is a huge concept in terms of, it's an independent concept in terms of regulation of AI. Data privacy is, say, 50% of the pie, and IP is about 40%, leaving 10% for ethics, if you ask me currently, and how it's being looked at. Intellectual property rights, you need to determine, right? IP will come in terms of data that's going in, data that's coming out. Is it open source platforms? Is it data that is universally accessible? Is it information that is confidential and created just for the purpose of your company? There are all these checklists you need to go through. I'm not an IP lawyer, but at the same time, I do deal with this on an ad hoc basis. But you make sure, see, again, Vishal, it will come down to going back to the fundamentals, right? You apply IP to a particular creation when it is individual to you and your company or etc. I think it will come down to that. You have to have a clear agreement with your service provider as to what sort of a open source or what sort of a tool you're using. You have to understand as to who owns the rights of the tool, for what purposes the tool is being created. Is it being created just for your company, or if it is being created for as a general service that they have? What is the involvement that your service provider will have in creation of this tool? If you are a service provider yourself, you need to be very clear on what your business model is, right? is all about transparency, even when it comes to IP rights. So when it comes to legal and legal accountability and responsibility, these are parameters that you must define from the get-go. IAPP has a great resource in terms of a lexicology, in terms of a definitions list on what all should be considered when you're discussing AI. And the first word on that list is accountability, because that is something that translates into defining roles and responsibilities. So as a lawyer, you should make sure your agreement in terms of who owns what, starting from the technology to the output and the input data, should be very clearly well defined to establish IP claim within this.
Yep. I request participants, like if you have any questions, please put it in the chat, or else you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Maanya. I have a question here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, as yeah, great presentation. Just considering that organizations have large data spread across organizations, both internal and external, and it's a common, it's known that most of the people do not know, or within the organization, where the data sits and across multiple applications. And then, particularly considering the privacy domain, and the sensitive data that is spread across, and it's available in different formats across different applications. Where do you start? Like, if an organization wants to consider and consolidate all the data, and then understand the fits, and first of all, try to protect that and consider a platform where they can have a clear understanding. Most of the organizations are trying to do that, but they don't know where to start. And so, what is your experience in your organization, and what was the step that you have taken?
Yeah, that's a great question, Krishnan. So this was a challenge that we will always face in large companies. Like you said, it's not something that is going to be unique to one person. What I have realized is starting from the source is always helpful. So when we talk about the source, I mean the individuals who are using the data, right? So for me, what works best is if I divide it up in terms of categories of data subjects that I might potentially be interacting with as a company. And who are the people in my company that are collecting or providing this data? Then move on to understanding how they are collecting or sharing this data with me, or collecting external data subjects information, personal information, and then take it from there in terms of a data mapping sequence. So where does that go? Now, this is much easier said than done. I will say that. Creating a RUPA, record of processing activities, on an enterprise level has proven to be relatively useful. It does give you some insight. And of course, having very clear TPRM guidelines and PIA guidelines, which you enforce and put it within the process of your product managers or your developers, ask them, make them and understand that coming to you as a legal and data privacy counterpart is crucial at a certain stage, so that you have your own record of what is happening and when it's happening. These are some approaches that have proven to be extremely helpful, at least in my experience.
Right, I appreciate that. Yeah, and particularly the challenges in terms of, this has been a challenge. Let me just break it up into those two few points. Like, considering from where we have evolved, like organization like yours, where we have had legacy systems, and as with the emerging technologies, we have always tried to adapt to those technologies, and looking at modernization, and with those technologies, we have actually faced multitude of problems, challenges in terms of identifying the attributes, and denoting them with a particular technical or the name, and then defining that particular term in terms of metrics, or in terms of the key terms for the organization, how the business understands and how the technical teams and IT understand. And this is a common platform where we have actually tried to translate that into metadata and see that both at the producer level and the consumer level of the data, like you mentioned about collecting data and so on. So each time the data is actually classified accordingly or metadata is organized, and then we can, bring that into the understanding of the organization, then identify and classify the data according to privacy, security, and then obviously the people who are going to use it and then map them accordingly, right?
Yeah, I think that's the best way. You can never sort of see, this is something that will have to be taken on a central level, right? You can't have someone who works on multiple separate teams very independently take this up, because it's going to be, like you said, understanding is going to be very different everywhere. So you have to establish a common understanding, for which you need someone who has a bird's eye view on the entire process, who can see it from 10,000 feet above and say, this is what it looks like. Now break it down on the ground level for me. So, like I said, these are some of these practices, while they may seem very routine and very paperwork centric and documentation centric, it's always the best way. So when you start digging into what is actually happening, and even if you are taking down metadata based on someone else's understanding, there's always the risk of, someone misrepresenting or just having a difference in understanding, like you said. So I think a controlled assessment and uniform practices throughout the company kind of help in mitigating this, at least to a large extent.
Right. Agree. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yep. Hi, ma'am. Thank you for a great presentation and your insights.
Thank you.
I come from an offensive security background. So we do offensive security for a bunch of clients. And currently we are working for some defense organizations where we are developing certain, without getting into the specifics, we are training certain LLMs. And there's this one module of the project that requires us to get access to audio clips of gunshots.
Okay.
Now zooming out, you've seen that ChatGPT took off and that brought AI into the limelight. They trained their model on pretty much everything they could get their hands on,
Yeah.
without like almost circumventing any laws that were citing fair use policies and all that. And now that AI governance has taken place, and I come from the background where nothing personal, but we hate AI governance because now us small players cannot do the same thing that the larger companies have already done and established themselves as the benchmark. So when we sit down and try to get some data, we have to go through any country that we are trying to get the data from. We have to comply to their regulations. We have to, for every small, even if it's a 5-second clip, and we are going to use it for research or training, we have to go and comply to that thing. So do you think small players can expect some form of relief going forward in the kind of regulations that are put in place?
I think, yeah, so I do believe that's already on the way. So do regulations and regulators definitely, when you look at frameworks and you look at any sort of limitations that are put in and guidances that are provided by regulators, they do consider the impact that a particular AI development tool tool will have, right? So whether they do it on a risk-based or an ethic-based or anything like that, they do consider it, because say a tool that you are developing, which is essentially for, hopefully not for the purpose of profiling an individual, will have much less impact as compared to, say, a ChatGPT interface. And you are right, it is unfair that ChatGPT basically knows every one of my movements because it was at a time when AI wasn't being regulated. This is something that we have seen develop in laws in general. Privacy laws also sort of grew up like that. They started with a blanket approach for everybody, and a lot of the laws started taking out certain exceptions. The best example I can actually think of is data breach notification laws in a lot of countries. They started off with a blanket requirement saying that, GDPR initially had started that, where they said that, okay, you need to have one 72-hour mandatory reporting deadline, irrespective of the size of your company or the number of data subjects impacted. Then it moved to a more risk-based understanding approach, and this doesn't work for everybody. The same happened with the DPDP Act in India. If you look at what we initially had in 2018 and 2019, which a lot of industries found as burdensome, the purpose of the country became to boost startups and smaller companies to make sure they have a fair chance. So I do think that AI regulations have the potential to go that way, because at the end of the day, like I said, it's not just about the challenges that come out of AI. It's also to ensure that the technology itself is given enough boost and encouragement that it works for the benefit of people, governments, businesses alike. So I don't think you'll have many laws which just stop right now. There will be a lot of amendments as laws are growing, as people's perceptions grow, as understanding increases. So it is possible. I do think it will sort of make it a more fair play market kind of a scenario.
Thank you very much.
Ma'am, will for another 5 minutes take 1 or 2 questions and then wind up.
Can I take the privilege of asking one more question, please?
Sure,
And
sure,
it's
sir.
a challenge,
Please go ahead.
Sorry if I'm taking the time. Yeah, and this I'm touching upon the areas of data quality, data governance, and so on. Particularly, how the business and IT align. The data stewards or data owners and so on, and how the data moves within the organization. That has been a challenge, and maintaining the quality of data. And then now for this Gen AI, whatever we are talking about, we are actually capturing the data from what is there, and then organizations have tried to standardize on them, particularly taking the key terms and trying to some sort of previously in the old systems we used to talk about data dictionary, and then we used to put them into a data model, capture the same into the data model, metadata in form of a glossary, and then apparently that is used by the business side, and then the technical side obviously what technology they're using. People have continuously, over a period of time in SQL Server, Oracle, even now in big data, we have different file formats and so on. So when you move across from those systems to this center of excellence or standard, maintaining the standard for those key terms is essential. This is what I was exactly referring to in my previous question. So how do you, establish that kind of definitions, adding to my previous question in terms of quality, and now that is the same data that we are now relying upon for generating additional data or synthetic data or Gen AI and so on, and how can we rely on that?
Yeah, so I do agree this is a big problem, AI or otherwise, in terms of maintaining data qualities, especially if you are working in a company or in a space which depends on data and processes a large amount of data. So the flow of it, of course, ends up ensuring that there is some form of contamination, or at least guarantees that it's not going to remain the same as what was input. I do think regulations to a certain extent take that into consideration when they put the responsibility on individuals to say that they have the right to correct their data wherever they see any sort of a mistake or any inaccurate data. And they do give us the obligation as data fiduciaries or controllers or any of them to maintain the accuracy of data only to the extent that it is possible. Right, reasonably possible. Nobody will expect data to remain accurate and will expect sanitization at an unreasonable level. That being said, I believe this is more of a downstream data flow kind of a question. So it does matter in terms of for what you're using the data, when you're done with it, do the purposes increase along the way? So even if you're not aware of all the systems where this data could potentially flow, As an enterprise, it will be easy to determine what all I can potentially use this data for. So it comes back to the argument of, oh, but I can do this with data and I might need it for this. Now, retention requirements and purpose limitation requirements aside, if we're talking purely about data sanity, the best way to ensure that data remains sane and to put in protocols which protect the data in itself is to first determine what all as an enterprise you want to and you can do with this data. Once you have, you work backwards, right? Once you have, you sort of see that, okay, fine, then this is all the places where the data can go. These are the data sets that this particular data set can be mixed with. And you put in those necessary safety requirements and controls and limitations as per your information security policies and terms.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes. I guess we'll wind up, ma'am. It's 5:26. And yep, thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us today for this enlightening session on global AI regulations. This was a really enlightening presentation. And I also thank all the participants for being patient so far and attending this session. And we'll catch up again on the same date, 27th next month on March on another topic, hardware security. So until then, see you again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
you.